Hi, it's Dennis Daly. On most of my assignments, I just flew somewhere, did an interview, and went back to either D.C. or L.A. But in the case of Music in the Mountains, that wonderful eclectic music festival that was held in Grass Valley, California, I stayed 3 days. One of my hosts there was Sarah Wagster. I said to her that I really felt that most people, whether they would admit it or not, had a little classical music in their soul.
Oh, absolutely. We moved here from the Bay Area, and we're accustomed to culture in our life. And many people have come here to live in retirement. And so they also want culture in their lives. And this is what I chose to devote my volunteer efforts towards, to make sure it could be an important part of the community.
How did all of this get started?
It was about 18 years ago when our conductor and music director, Paul Perry, moved here from San Francisco. And he and our executive director decided to provide classical music.
I know I've been involved in all kinds of music all my life. I really, and my friends know this, I would be a terribly dull person if it weren't for music. I really pity those people who have a tin ear. I mean, it just amazes me when people can't get turned on by this.
That's right. We have classical music in our home almost all waking hours.
I have a good friend in Washington, D.C., who after the birth of his daughter decided to play loud classical music all the time to teach her to sleep with it, and now she's studying oboe in college, so it was subliminal, I guess. Let's talk about students and the foundation and everything. Can you put into perspective your feelings about the importance of exposing young people to quality music?
I know how important it was in my life, and I was very fortunate. I did go to public schools in Sacramento area, but I went to school in the 50s, and at that time we did have music even in grammar school. And I sang in the choir. I didn't play an instrument, but it still has been a very important part of my life. I just don't want to live without it.
Well, I went through Catholic schools, and I don't know a nun who doesn't play piano, so we had an awful lot of music.
Yeah, I took piano lessons, but it didn't stick. It was the singing that was important to me.
What advice would you give to parents who have a child who's even showing just a little bit of interest in music to nurture that?
Make sure they have lessons, so somehow they need to have that in their lives. Being able to read music for the rest of your life just helps so much.
By the way, I need to pay you a compliment. You can't have grown up in the 50s.
I did. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah, very much.
Thank you. This week we are in Grass Valley, California at one of America's great undiscovered music festivals, Music in the Mountains. It is a great mix of classical and jazz and big band and piano solos. And the soloist who thrilled us in a performance I heard last night, Lisa Spector. I asked Lisa about the importance of music in schools and the fact that music not only teaches the arts, it teaches a lot of discipline.
I could not agree more. I teach a lot of children. In fact, I run a whole music school in my hometown now in Half Moon Bay, California. And I teach groups of children from 4 years old on up. And they just love music. They sing, they dance, they play, and they just love it. And parents that ask me, how can I influence my children positively towards music so they don't have to force them to practice an instrument, but just want them to be exposed to it, I really say the best thing you can do is have good music in the house. Take them to good children's concerts, take them to a symphony orchestra, expose them to good music, and get involved. And you know, the community I'm in, actually, even though funding has been cut from California from the music schools, the parents raise the money so they bring in good teachers to the music education district.
You know, if you love music, and I've used the word rush before, I was in a parking garage getting ready to leave the other day, and Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto was on, so I stopped. Mm-hmm. And I listened, and I cannot remember the refrain, but it's right before the ending where it comes back in, and it either changes key, modulates, or does something. I can't remember. But goosebumps came up. I mean, my hair, I knew it was coming. It's like the end of It's a Wonderful Life. You cry even though you know what's going to happen. I think that's one of the magic things about music. Whether it's owning 16 copies of Handel's Messiah and comparing the technique, or just hearing the same recording over and over again, as people do with rock music, and really just having this explosive feeling when you get to all the special parts of it.
Well, I've been playing this Grieg piano concerto for 20 years now, and I will tell you, I still hear new things in it. There isn't a time I don't sit back on stage tonight. I was just enjoying the orchestra part so much, and hearing the gorgeous cello section is just so beautiful.
See, I've never performed on an instrument, but when I was in high school, I sang with our dance band. Now, little tiny Catholic school in Indiana, we thought we had a high-class dance band. I listen to recordings now, and I think, our band director made us think we were good, which is a nice thing, but there's nothing nicer as a singer to stand in front of the orchestra and feel it going through you. I mean, I can't imagine as a pianist, because of the complexity of it, what that must feel like.
I think it's very similar. It's wonderful to be on stage with a terrific group of musicians and a really good conductor, and just know that you're so supported musically by that group, and you can just play your heart out. It's a wonderful feeling.
Do you sometimes have to adapt to a very different conducting style when you move around?
Absolutely. That first chord, that's so important to place it right. The only way I place it right with the orchestra is I have to come in a little bit later than I think I should come in, and then it's always right.
Well, one of the pieces they played tonight had so many little tiny entrances in it, and I'm thinking you're out there naked when you do that. It's almost like some trumpet solos scare me to death, and I've never played the trumpet.
Right.
How young were you when you first knew that either you knew you wanted to play piano, or your parents knew that you had a proclivity for it?
I was 7 when I started piano, and I would say that I took to it right away, and very fortunately my mother, who had some musical talent, saw my talent right away and knew that I had a gift. And I always took it very seriously, and I would say when I was 11, I remember making a conscious decision that I was going to increase my practice time to 3 hours every day, because I wanted to be a concert pianist. And I knew that took at least that.
I hope this isn't bad advice, but I remember my mother using the money her father had given her, not very much money, to buy me a piano as a child. And I know when I put my mother in a nursing home and moved to California, getting rid of that piano was one of the most difficult things I had to do. How proficient and famous do you have to be able to travel with your piano? Are you to that point yet?
At the level of Horovitz, and
I see.
Too many Horowitzes.
Bring your Bosendorfer with you. Yeah. I remember Professor Peter Schickele, whom some people may not know, but he's kind of the Spike Jones of classical music in a way, when he pretends to be this person who has found this undiscovered music of one of Bach's sons, P.D.Q. Bach. In the program, it always says, you know what's coming. Professor Schickele uses what is locally available exclusively.
He is very clever.
Where some people, it'll say Steinway or Yamaha or whatever. You're recording?
Yes, I have made a few recordings now.
Where are they available?
Encore d'Elegance is available in Tower Records in the Bay Area in California, and my other one, which is called Day at the Beach, which is a collaboration with 2 other pianists, is sold internationally, more at gift shops and also Tower Records and stores like that. But it was released, I think, almost 3 years ago now, and it went to the Nature Company internationally, and within 1 month of its release, it was one of the top 10 international bestsellers there.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
What's your favorite kind of music to play? Twofold, and who's your favorite composer for piano?
The great thing about being a pianist is there's always, the repertoire is so huge, and
is
there's
it
always
is
so
it
much.
the largest collection of music for any instrument?
Yes, it is. To my knowledge, it is. I love the Romantics, and of course I love playing the Grieg, but I frequently play a lot of the Chopin repertoire. I have a Russian background, so I love Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, Prokofiev.
I asked her if she had ever performed Rhapsody in Blue.
Many times.
Do you like it?
Oh, I love it. It's so much fun.
Have you heard the recording that Michael Tilson Thomas did with the piano roll? Do you like that?
Yes, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Michael Tilson Thomas is wonderful.
A lot of people don't realize if they hear Rhapsody in Blue done, da, 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 da. It was done as a jazz piece, obviously. I mean, it had this wonderful percussive feel to it.
Well, I think it is the piece in the sort of classical repertoire that has the most diversity between all recordings, all pianists. It's just so drastically different tempos, different phrasings, different styles, different, more than probably any other piano piece.
I may sound jingoistic saying this, but I remember seeing the London Promenade concerts, and it was Simon Rattle conducting over there, and they ended one of the concerts with Rhapsody in Blue, and I don't know who the pianist was, but he was absolutely fantastic. The performance was electric, and it was so neat to see this British audience just erupt at the end of Rhapsody in Blue. But music's universal.
Music is a universal language, so it tends to do that.
So where are you going from here now?
From here, I'm going back home to Half Moon Bay.
You're not that far away. I envy you. That's a beautiful part of the world.
It is. I love it. I love it.
What's the festival? There's one crop. There are a heck of a lot of pumpkins, but there are also flowers everywhere.
Flowers, artichokes. It's a beautiful place to live. Yeah, it's great.
Lisa, thank you. You're a magnificent pianist and pretty lady, and thanks for being on the program.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It takes an awful lot of work to put a festival such as Music in the Mountains together, and no one knows that more than Jack Roberts. He's president of the board of the foundation, which I might point out is a nonprofit group. He, like a lot of other people, migrated to the Grass Valley area, taking with them their great love of classical music. He says it's vitally important that the good music be preserved and that people get together to preserve culture.
The future of classical music is truly in fine hands when you can hear young musicians. And we have a young musicians competition where we have 50, 60 kids that come and compete for scholarships. And it's wonderful. The quality of professionalism among these kids, and it goes all the way from 6 years old to high school. The key to the whole thing has been the standards that has been set by our maestro, Paul Perry.
Paul is a class act.
He is definitely a class act. And so education is one of the major things. Coming up next week, we have a concert that's going to recognize key educators in our area. Without a good parent community base, the kids don't get the education. Without a good education for the kids and our community, we don't get the volunteers, and this is why it's so great.
Well, I'm lucky. I grew up in parochial schools where we took music for granted,
right.
And I don't know whether parochial schools even have the money to do it, but we see schools that continue to fund, and pardon me if the person listening to this doesn't agree with this, but football, basketball, soccer, and to heck with the music program.
We're very, very concerned over the level of education, musical education. We're very fortunate, though. We have on our board the district superintendent of schools, and Terry McAteer, has literally opened the door for a greater awareness on the part of arts education. That's fine arts, music, dance. And so I think we're very, very fortunate up here to have a supportive educational base.
Well, one of the things that's happened, and I'm glad it's a backlash, is that popular music has gotten so far away from melody now that I think that there are young kids who realize that there is something to be said about a fine melodic line.
It's just a wonderful synergistic arrangement,
What advice would you give to a business person, an organization, Kiwanis, whatever, listening in a small town, realizing that, we've got to capture this before it's lost?
What I truly believe Music in the Mountains and all other musical endeavors or art endeavors bring is a quality of life. And if I were a Rotarian, if I were a businessman currently, and I'm retired now, but if I were involved there, I would support events like this as much as I can, because that means that the quality of employee and my ability to attract quality employees becomes that much greater.
Well, I want to thank you for inviting me up here. The music's been great. The food's been wonderful.
Great.
I want to come back. I've never been to this part of California before. I love it here.
Well, we would welcome you at any time.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
The man who has been the music master all of this time is a very congenial fellow who was once with the San Francisco Opera Company, Paul Perry. I sat down to talk to Paul at a reception and mentioned to him that some of the music that his group had performed, and with not much rehearsal, was rather difficult with a lot of quick entrances, and I had my fingers crossed that everybody would come in at one time.
Well, we have little signals that we give back and forth that I don't show the audience right in front of my chest, but this is a phenomenally fine orchestra. Some of these players are, to give you an example, my first violin section, almost everybody in the section, there are 8 of them, and almost every one of them is either a concertmaster someplace or an assistant concertmaster, so I'm spoiled rotten. They're fabulous.
Well, I feel very lucky. I went through 12 years of Catholic schools in Indiana, and every nun plays piano. I then went to Indiana University, which has one of the finest music schools.
America's
and
biggest music school.
Yeah. And my college roommate was a tenor with the IU Opera Company, and I whistle all the time. I'm not concert leveled yet, but friends of mine, that's the one thing they know about me. I'm constantly whistling. But let me ask you a couple of things. Like a lot of people...
I have to respond to that whistling because I had an interesting thing happen about 5 years ago. A man from San Francisco, whom I did not know at all, called me and said, I am a fantastic whistler and I would like to come be on your summer festival and whistle some soprano arias. Needless to say, I thought it was a little too esoteric for us to tackle, but but I did have somebody do it.
Well, I have found that, and I'll probably blow it now because I'm nervous, I'm on the spot, that a lot of people, 85% of people will come up and say, that is so loud. Only 15% will say, how do you do that? The funny thing is, most people who aren't whistlers would whistle, but whistlers will go, because the register's better up there.
Yeah,
if
you sound like a piccolo.
Well,
could I hire you for a summer?
For those of us who love music, I just really think it's a shame that we can't get more kids out. In some ways, classical music preaches to the choir. We've got schools that have cut funding. Kids who 30 years from now who grew up on rap music won't be able to dance to anything at their class reunion. It just grieves me sometimes.
It grieves me greatly. We've seen it here in this county. We've seen it throughout the state of California. Music has been axed from the schools, and even though the 2 area high schools have very good music programs per se, they are all preschool or after-school activities. They are no longer included in the curricula, and this is criminal. It's absolutely criminal.
In my little high school, we had a wonderful band director, Walter Anslinger, who made us think we were better than we were. I listened to recordings of our stage band, and I think, boy, that was just marginal, But I sang Laura and Chances Are.
Oh, yeah.
And I can tell you, there was one time we had an arrangement that has that typical right in the middle, bum, 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 bum. And then the clarinet and I had to come in, and you see... Well, the clarinet choked one day. And the band director said, well, why don't you do that as a solo? So we're in Evansville, Indiana, at this big high school, and I'm terrified. I'm wearing a white blazer, and I went, and you see... And this girl swoons in about the 3rd row. The only time that ever happened to me. But I can imagine what it must feel like to be that close to an orchestra. I mean, it must be indescribable to feel that music come through you. That's why I wanted to conduct all my life.
There is no thrill like conducting when it's cooking, and you know what I mean by cooking, and everybody is so tight. And I felt that we certainly had that in this evening's program, a great deal of tightness. You just feel like you've been transported someplace, and nobody else gets that. I'm right there where it's all coming. You sort of push and pull the knobs to kind of silence down what's too big and bring up what's not too big, and it's just a wonderful feeling.
I remember talking to Gerald Otley, who was conductor of the Mormon Tabernacle.
Absolutely.
And I said, how do you get them to sing as one voice? And he said, now, wait a minute. To you, they're singing as one voice. To me, they're not.
That's right.
You could hear it up front, but of course, not that the orchestra wasn't good, but the acoustics of a theater have a lot to do with creating the fullness of that sound.
Absolutely. It's a bad hall, and actually I work in a bad hall. We electronically enhance the reverb of this hall.
You can tell that on the piccolo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to get a little wash, otherwise it's an extremely dry hall. And an extremely dry hall makes the sound pull away from you too quickly.
About 15 years ago, my hometown church in Indiana carpeted.
Oh, yes, that
And
helps.
our choir sounded magnificent. We rehearsed for Christmas, and we're yelling. We're absolutely yelling, and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. That happens.
We had to retrain our ear.
Absolutely, you really have to work hard in a dry hall, and that's the beauty of the wonderful European halls. One, they didn't build for 3,000 people as we have to in America to pay the bills. They're more like 7, 8, and 1,100 seat houses, and they're in the traditional old, what we call a shoebox. And we've tried in America to shorten that shoebox and make it into a fan shape so everybody's got a good seat, and it's a terrible.
Well, and what do? You're sitting on the left side, you hear too much percussion. You're sitting on the right side, all you're getting is the violins.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the music
It's like sitting too close to Cinerama.
you have to have something for it to bounce off of.
Absolutely.
And it needs that space.
Now, this may be a little bit esoteric for the audience, but I mentioned that I'm kind of an amateur conductor. I noticed that real conductors conduct before the beat. I'm on the beat because it's already recorded. But is it difficult to be ahead of the orchestra? I mean, obviously you have to signal them ahead of time.
That's why you are doing that. Part of it is that little bit of forward motion, shall we say, in front of them gives them an instantaneous feel for the pulse that's going to come for them. That's what makes it a tight entrance or a ragged one. You have to give them that preparation. They begin to breathe with your mind. You know, I talk to the orchestra often about this. I say, well, I don't know why you didn't get that entrance right there, because the orchestra in my head plays it perfectly. And they always respond to me, well, why don't you get the orchestra in your head to do the playing? It's that kind of a thing. They need that slight prep ahead to feel what my rhythm is for a certain side, particularly in something that just jumps right off, at a allegro, say. It's much easier if we're not fighting for quick tempos.
If you listen to Rhapsody in Blue, which was written as a jazz piece with a small group conducted by Paul Whiteman with sock cymbals, and yet we hear these symphonic embellishments. Handel's Messiah, which should be dance-like. I mean, when it was first done in Dublin, it was done with not too good musicians and a small group, and Handel couldn't find the people he wanted.
As a matter of fact, my understanding is that Handel couldn't get the string count that he wanted, and that Dublin performance, I believe I'm correct here, had 14 or 16 oboes doubling all sorts of parts. It must have sounded like a snake den.
Well, I know there's always that fight. Is it Michael Hogwood, who's done so much music?
Hogwood.
Yeah, Christopher Hogwood. In trying to go back and get the original instruments even.
You know,
but yet to a modern day ear, if I hear a Baroque piece of music that's got too much trilling in it, it doesn't feel good to me.
I prefer modern instruments in Baroque work. I heard a wonderful quote from the conductor from the St. Martin's in the Field,
Neville
Mariner. And an interviewer was talking with him about Christopher Hogwood and Trevor Pinnock's early music instrument ensembles, and without losing a beat, Sir Neville Mariner said, you know, if J.S. Bach came back today, I think he'd like indoor plumbing.
You have a real point there. Let me ask you one final thing here, and that is, could you talk to parents who have a child who's showing some interest in music, even if they're just banging a drum with some degree of irregularity, about finding a way at least to get them an old beat-up piano or something, so that instead of drifting out into the street someplace, they're putting a little discipline in their life?
Absolutely. It's a tremendous discipline training, and if your child shows any interest whatsoever, I would say run. Do not walk. Run to the nearest music teacher on whatever you can get them started. Many of us don't end up playing the instrument that we started on, and of course piano's the great grounding, but you know, the problem now is that they're not going to get the opportunities at school, since we've knocked those programs out, and parents are going to have to take care of this on their own until the day comes that we realize that we have done a terrible disservice to our children by not having music as a part of the program.
Well, you and I take so much of this for granted. I was at Mel Torme's funeral last week, and some of the reporters were talking about the fact that there's a whole different attitude about good music between guys like me who pass 50 and people just 20 years younger than us. It's declining quickly.
And that I attribute that to the fact that kids are not being exposed at school to any of the things that you and I were exposed to in school. We had a fine concert band in most schools, or at least an adequate concert band.
And band shells in cities.
Absolutely. And how many cities do you know have a summer concert series now? Very few. Very few.
And one final thing, about the only place a lot of people get musical training anymore is at church.
Church choirs, excellent place to start children. It's great to meet other kids that are doing this kind of an activity. I think it's amazing that we still have kids choirs going at churches. Thank God somebody's doing the work, because we've abandoned it at the school.
Well, we certainly owe a lot to organized religion for much of the repertoire of symphonic music.
Absolutely. Many of the great choral orchestral works were a direct product of composers writing for the church and composing works for high holidays and this kind of thing. Yeah.
I said that was going to be it. I got one more quick question. The Brahms you did at the end, I didn't know who wrote it. And I'm thinking to myself, is it Borodin? Is it no?
No, the arrangements were done by Dvorak.
Dvorak, right. Yes. And I'm thinking, boy, it has that wonderful element. But one of the things that I really like, and because Dvorak's rather modern by many standards, is it had kind of a Bernard Herrmann rise to the violins in the last movement.
Oh, yeah.
If you ever saw the movie Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, Bernard Herrmann has only about 15 seconds at the end to go from no music to completely rapping. So he jumps up 3 octaves with the violins, and you go, ooh, that feels good.
Yeah.
But that's a neat, I hate to use the word gimmick, but a neat little way of making the violins jump out of the box almost. I love that piece.
Yeah, they're wonderful arrangements. They were written originally, Brahms did all of those Hungarian dances for piano 4-hand, and they just sold like hotcakes. And Brahms he was on to other things and didn't feel like orchestrating them for his publisher. And Dvorak was coming along. Brahms actually was sort of a mentor for Dvorak and introduced him to society. And Dvorak asked him if he could take those pieces and put them into orchestral. Actually, he was looking for works himself to get into the publishing so that he could begin to sell his own music.
Well, they're so evocative. They're just magnificent. Now, you're where now? You're associated with this, obviously. You were in San Francisco originally.
I was in San Francisco with the San Francisco Opera before I came up here 19 years ago to start this program, and here I am.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to have you with us.
Someone else who has been the driving force along with Paul Perry these 18 years at Music in the Mountains is the executive director, Terry Brown. I asked him about the evolution of the festival during the past 2 decades.
Well, I think it's been interesting over the 18 years that the whole community has used this as somewhat of a cultural identity. It's always been an artistic area here in Nevada County, and one thing they lacked was a real classical music organization of size. And I found that a lot of people really think it says, hey, we have something now. We've kind of come of age in this area.
How did all of this get started? It was, as you say, it was nearly 20 years ago.
Well, it's an interesting point. There has been a chorus here for many, many years, started with the Cornish miners who actually sang down in the mines. And for many years after that, they had a chorus called the Golden Chain Chorale. A number of us would get together and drink copious amounts of wine. And the idea came up, well, what about a music festival? So we put together a budget and got a bunch of people together, and it grew from there. So maybe the one-word answer is wine.
I see. Well, you're not that far. Well, this whole area. I'm used to going to California wine country. You mentioned mines. Everywhere you go, you see an historical marker. We're in the sesquicentennial year of the 49ers now. Is there a lot of hoopla being done about that up here?
Somewhat. The whole sesquicentennial, I think, didn't turn out to be what the state was hoping it would be. But we just had some sesquicentennial days, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where they had some gold panning exhibits and things like that. Now, the Empire Mine here in town, which is a very large mine, was one of the last gold gold mines, hard rock gold mines, to close. I think it didn't close until, I'm not the best history buff, I think it was around 1959 or so.
Wow.
There really was not a depression in this area because of the Empire Mine. They were pulling gold out all through the Depression.
We're in Grass Valley, California. We are the guests of Music in the Mountains, a wonderful festival that's been going on for nearly 20 years now every summer to bring culture and the arts to this part of California and to set an example for cities of 10,000 that they can do it up the right way. One of the driving forces all of this time has been Terry Brown, the executive director. We've been talking to him, and I mentioned that while we were attending a Sunday event called Bach's Lunch, BACH''S, Lunch, the building we were in felt very much like an old Catholic convent.
Well, oddly enough, that is what it was.
Really?
Yes, it was.
It has that feel about it.
Well, of course, the name is St. Joseph's Hall, where we perform. The whole complex is called Mount St. Mary's, and it was built around the turn of the century, just before the turn of the century. They have had their centennial celebration here a couple of years ago. We have to go down front, look at the nameplate to see exactly when. And the large part of the building was built first. The performing hall was later built as a chapel for the convent with its pressed tin walls and ceiling and the wonderful wooden floors. And it was a convent for quite a while, and then it closed. And for a while it was run by the Sisters of Mercy as a business school, as an orphanage. And then it was actually laid fallow, was not used for a number of years till a group here in town talked the Sisters of Mercy into giving it to them as a nonprofit. And they've been working on it and trying to breathe a little more life back into it.
Now, what about people who want to come to the festival? You're running through right before July 4th. But if they're looking toward next year or other events, where can they go for information? Do you have a website?
It's oddly enough at www.musicinthemountains, that's all one word, no spaces, .org.
I must tell you, I was so pleased with the quality. This is my first time here. Some of the musicians told me they hadn't had that much time to rehearse, but it just sounded magnificent last night.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Our conductor likes to describe it as a great adrenaline rush. They have from 1.5 to 2 rehearsals for each concert, and I'm speaking of the orchestra at this point. Now, granted, a lot of the pieces the players have played before in other venues, but we have to remember these are players that have not played as a group before. They come together, they have a couple of rehearsals, and they do a concert. It's amazing.
Well, that's like the old thing about the All-Star game in baseball. People say, hey, you have all these stars out there, but can they play together?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the whole, as you know, the blend is a real question. It's not that you can just suddenly walk in and it sounds like an orchestra's played together year after year.
The one thing I haven't asked, we talk about classical music, there are many different kinds of music you're going to hear through the season, right?
Yes, we kind of think of the many sisters of classical music. There's the core, what we all think of, the Brahms, Beethoven, Mozart, Strauss, those sorts of composers with the orchestra and the chorus. But we also believe that jazz, big band, and the pops are a part of classical music. And they certainly have all the intricacies and the complexity and the beautiful music that we think of as classical music. We had a new piece written by a youngster who's now 17, wrote it when he was 15, for brass ensemble. And it was melodious, it was beautiful, and it didn't redo old melodies. It was new stuff. It was great that some writing is happening, certainly, with melodies. Matter of fact, there is some school of thought that says that the real contemporary classical music that's written and that will be remembered is the movie music. It's the music that backs up the movies.
And if Terry Brown, the executive director of Music in the Mountains, has his way, we may soon be hearing some of that intermixed with the classical, big band, and jazz. It was a wonderful music-filled 3 days in Grass Valley, California, at Music in the Mountains. I'm Dennis Daly.